We will start shortly, just waiting for a couple of minutes to allow other to join. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. Okay, welcome everyone. I think we can start. See, we have reached almost the same number of attendees that were here yesterday. Just as a reminder, at the end of the 3 days, which end tomorrow, this is the second day, the second training, the second practical training, and tomorrow will be more of an interactive theoretical presentation. But at the end of the third day, you will get a certificate for participating in this training issued by the project as part of this project. So it's important that obviously if you're interested and if you like the training, that you keep attending our sessions. So welcome back. For those who were not there yesterday, I am Simone Landucci. I am an urban planner and GIS expert from OpenPlan, one of the partners on this project. I have here with me Cassandra Titley O'Neill. Sandy, if you want to quickly introduce yourself. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry, talking into the mute. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Cassandra Titley O'Neill. I'm the marine biologist on the team, and I'm here to support Simone with the presentation today as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Sandy. We also have Theodore Allen. Teddy, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, we met with Teddy yesterday, for those who were here.
Hi, good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Teddy Allen. I'm a climate scientist here to support the climate aspect of the project in terms of the data input to the INVEST model, and I'm based here in Barbados. Thank you.
Okay. So just a quick recap of what we did yesterday. So let me fire up the last part of my presentation. So yesterday we mostly looked at the INVEST model. We had a first, in terms of the practical aspect, we had a first session on the importance of mapping ecosystems, and obviously the introduction to the whole process and to the module. We had a first review of the conceptual framework of the INVEST coastal vulnerability model. And then we went to look at each different input variables that it required. We have explored the GUI of the model itself, the graphic user interface, which is basically how you load the different parameters. We have explored what kind of information the model needs and how it uses them to compute the exposure index for the different shore points. And we have had visualization into QGIS of the different input data. We also jumped the gun a bit and had a look at the different the kind of results that the models outputs. So we managed to have a quick look at the type of outputs the models will provide, what the exposure index is, how it was calculated based on the input variable, and so on and so forth. I remember yesterday some of you had some problem in installing the different softwares and downloading the data set. So I'd like to check with you today if some of those problems have been addressed. We sent a fresh link to download the data set. So could you raise your hand if you managed to download it, and if you managed to do it successfully, are you able to open the data, etc. So if you could just use the raising hand in the reaction panel, I'll get a bit of an understanding if that worked well. So I have 11 people who raised their hand. The others didn't have the chance to download it, or some of you still experience some problem in downloading the dataset. So could you let us know in the chat? Okay. Problem with Invest, downloading not open. Okay. See, there's some people had problem with Invest. Specifically for the Mac version. Well, when Mac says that it doesn't recognize the developer, is because it doesn't come from the App Store. So you just need to override that and telling that you trust the developer. It's able to download QGIS, but unable to download the scenarios. Still trying. Okay. Okay. So the data set, it seems that some of you managed to open it. So I assume that there shouldn't be any problem with the data set per se. But cannot open also. Okay. Did some of you manage to replicate what we did yesterday and actually run the model? At the end of the process yesterday, we launched the Invest. So we basically click here, search for coastal vulnerability, and then we launched it. And if you recall, we had our GUI, we filled that in, and we hit run. And we started to run it. Can I have a show of hand if anybody managed to do that? Did try to do that? Managed to have the software running? Quite the same. So 9 people raise their hand. 8 people raise their hand.
Don't point me out, that's all. My eyes get frightened when I see you, you know. You don't go where you never had to get put out. I get frightened when I see you. You can move them, just don't move me.
Sorry?
But
I'm not sure if that was related to what we were discussing here. Okay, so if you had problems downloading the data, please, you can contact me directly. I will leave you my direct email address, and I'll try to communicate with you. If it's an issue of downloading the data, we could probably find a different way to send it around. When it comes to installing the software, if we have circulated additional information on how to download and install the software. And I see here someone saying that was able to run Invest successfully. That's great. Yes, but it doesn't quite look the same. Not sure in which way it doesn't look the same. It could be that we haven't opened the results yet, so we will do that today. But I'm glad to hear that some of you managed to run it. So, okay, what we will do now is, since yesterday we ran the model, we will go and have a look at what kind of information does it actually output. So if you didn't manage to run it yourself, you will have a chance. What missing was that I don't have the Jamaica base map. Okay, understood. I'll explain how to get a Jamaica base map to see where you are. Okay. So if you haven't had a chance to run it yourself, we will run it together. Before doing that, though, yesterday we didn't have a chance to look in depth at the habitat input to the model and at the population input to the model. So today, I'd like to start off by doing exactly that. So yesterday in our presentation, we effectively skipped the habitat component. Now, let's go back to our QGIS for a second. So no, before doing that, let's discuss about the habitat. So the habitat is one of the most important aspects of GIS and of INVEST, and it's probably the input we're most interested in, because we discussed yesterday how the models runs according to or based on an ecosystem service approach, which means that what the model tries to do is to evaluate the contribution habitat have and the role habitat plays in reducing the impact of erosion and inundation on coastal areas. So effectively, we know that mangroves and the mangroves and seagrass and other benthic habitat, as well as terrestrial habitats, have a role in breaking down the energy of the waves, sediment the soil, so avoids erosion, and are generally helpful in terms of keeping the coast stable and reducing the impact of wind and waves. So the models needs to consider that, and it needs to get some information on where these habitats are and what is the kind of role they play according to the literature, according to the data we currently have. I will ask you if you could raise your hand unless you have a question. So if there is a question, we will have a Q&A in a minute. Just want to first get this part discussed and then go on. Let's go in our QGIS and have a look of what kind of habitat information do we have. So let's open our QGIS. This is our QGIS. It was mentioned earlier that some of you don't have the base map. So you have QGIS, you manage to load your data, such as the landmass, the area of investigation, the different points, the dam, and so on and so forth, but you don't know where you are because you don't have a base map here. Adding base map is done from the browser. It's a relatively, we're not seeing your screen. Okay, sorry. Let me. Is that working now? Yeah. Okay. Right. So what you do to load, you need to create a connection with OSM, OpenStreetMap, to download the OpenStreetMap base maps. You do that by looking for the browser here. If you don't see the browser, so if you're in a situation like this, you right click and you want to see the browser panel there. So you right click anywhere in the layer aspect. This is what is called the TLC, the table of content. So you have the different layers there. Right click, show me the browser panel. You get the browser panel. The browser panel is from where you get the different data. You want to locate the XYZ tile and hit new connection. Now, when you do that, when you hit new connection, they ask for some information, and what you want to put there is exactly this. Just let me copy paste it. Okay, so new connection. You put your new connection, you give it a name, OSM, base map, something like that. And you click OK. Then you have all your connection here. One of them is the one we just created, OSM base map. Sorry, there's some. Sorry, no, that's fine. And let's remove it for a second. Let's do it another way. So you have your OSM base map, and when you click on the layer and you double click, there it is. It has been added. Layers are shown in orders from the top in your table of contents in the TOC, and then the rest. So since this is your base map, it should be at the bottom, and you can drag it down there. So right below training. So when you turn up things that are above it, they appear. So just as a reminder, right click, new connection, you paste this code, which I'll drop in the chat. There it is. You can just copy it. And new connection, paste that there. You give it a name, it could be any name, and then you click OK. That's how you get OSM base map. By the way, that's also how you get all sorts of other maps, base maps. You can get Google Satellite. There it is. You can get Google Terrain. There it is. You just need that URL. You can find those online. There are all sorts of different online resources there. Okay, so we're back here. We're in our base map. Let's go and have a look at our data set that has been provided to you. So let's go. Let's go in here. So this is the data set that's being provided to you. There is the Dominica folder, the Dominica case studies folder, and the Jamaica case study folder. If you open the Jamaica case study folder, you have your inputs with all the different inputs. And the one we want to look at today is 07 habitat. And later on, we'll look at population density. But before doing that, I want you to look at the MISC, the miscellaneous. So what's the miscellaneous? The miscellaneous is a series of other data sets that we have provided you with, which we have used to prepare the data that are in input. You'll see different data, so don't worry about all of them. What we are interested in is miscellaneous benthic cover, scenario 0, Jamaica. If you load that in, you move it to where you need it, which is here. Okay. You have loaded a benthic cover raster for Jamaica. What do we have here? What do we have here is actually a data set that was presenting different type of benthic covers, coral algae, spur and grove, R-bottom sparse algae, R-bottom dense algae, muddy bottom, dredged, sand, boulders and rocks, and then seagrass, either sparse or dense. This is quite an interesting data set because it's a very well done work prepared by the Nature Conservancies in the Caribbean, which, working with other partners, has developed the first ever Caribbean-wide 4-meter resolution benthic habitat map. Sorry, okay. With 13 standardized habitat classes across the region. Can't get it loaded. Okay, in the break, I will explain how to do this again. So we can reload, maybe working with someone. If whoever has problem loading the base map can stay during the break, I'll explain how to do it again. But basically what we're seeing here is the result of this very interesting work. It classified 13 standardized habitat classes across the region, and is a work that it's available for the whole of the Caribbean. And I'll show you now the proper website from where you can actually, as soon as it loads, see that these work done by the Nature Conservancy in collaboration with Allen Coral Atlas covers the whole of the Caribbean region. Takes a while to load, but once you have loaded it, you can see that it actually covers the whole of Jamaica, Haiti, and then the Dominica, as well as the other West Indies islands. So you can request access to this data to the Nature Conservancy. It's really, I think, is a really useful resource when it comes to habitat mapping and so on and so forth. So I recommend having a look at it if you have the chance. So why are we looking at this database? The concept that INVEST uses is that when you place yourself on the coastline, for example, say on the coastline of Yalas, this area here should be protected by virtue of being fronted by coral, algae, benthic cover, while areas that are fronted by sand are less likely to be protected. Sandy, maybe you can explain to us a bit better how that happens and the importance of these habitats have in protecting the coastline.
Thanks, Simone. If you guys don't mind, I'll keep my camera off because my internet is unstable. So I want to make sure that you're able to hear me and we don't have, I'm sounding like I'm from space or something. So on one of the tables in the presentation, the benthic cover, we have it there as coral, algae, spur and groove reef, but on one of the tables, we have the coral, they're actually broken down into 5 different types of coral habitat. In this one, we have them into just 2 categories, which would be the coral algae and the spur and groove reef. So based on what was created by TNC, you have the reef crest, which is generally found in areas where you have shallow water break zones, whether they're barrier reefs or fringing reefs. And this is usually between the back of the reef and the forereef. And within this type of habitat, you typically have an area that is dominated by hard corals, such as like fire corals, brain corals, and mustard-head corals. And we know that corals are like your first line of defense in terms of protecting the shoreline. They take the brunt of the damage. And then as you move further inland, then you typically have things like seagrass beds, and then closer along the shore, you have mangroves. We don't have the mangroves up on here. So as you go from reefs and you go inland, the reefs are your first line of defense, and these are the ones that are generally protect the coastline. Even within the reefs, we have different types of reefs, and depending on the type of reef, will determine how well the coastline is protected. So I just described to you the reef crest. We also have the forecrest, which is typically found on the exposed seaward slope of the reef. And it typically is characterized by sparse coral cover. And a lot of this has to do with the constant bombarding of force from winds and waves. But you also find some of the bigger corals, the bolder ones, things like brain corals and stuff. And then you typically also find some of the algae in there, which are able to break down some of the force. Behind of that, you would have the back reef. We generally tend to find these in shallow zones of about 2 to 3 meters deep. And this transitions into like a lagoon, so more or less. And what happens is this one has typically low relief. If you were here with the team yesterday, we talked about the importance of relief and then putting it into the invest model. So within this type of reef, you generally tend to find corals that have been battled, and they battled a lot because of how shallow the water is. And you generally tend to find some of the corals that are dead, but they're still intact. And they do still offer some protection to the coastline. However, in this particular type of area, it is dominated by macroalgae. And then you have the coral algae, which includes fringing reefs, patch reefs, and what are called like the bank reefs. And you generally, within this type of environment, tend to have live coral colonies. Here you would find some of the more characteristic corals, such as the massive elkhorn corals, the boulder star corals. Here you typically also find things like gorgonians, sponges, sea fans. In here you may find some areas where you have seagrass. Typically, if there's gonna be seagrass, you generally tend to find more like the turtle grass. And the seagrass would generally tend to be found between the coral colonies. Then you have the spur and groove, which is characterized by medium to high relief. And there can be alternating sand and coral formations. It just depends on the coastline. And within these here, you have, if you have hard sandy bottoms, you'll typically see some grooves, and this is generally caused by the way in which the waves and the currents actually run. So on the ID table, Simone, can you go forward one slide for a sec from your presentation so we could show them the table where we're getting this information from?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay.
Here?
The next one. It should say benthic cover classes identified. This is the slide here. Thank you. And then you would have your hard bottoms. Now the hard bottoms are ID number 6 and number 7. And the hard bottom is the distinguishing features. Do you have sparse algae or do you have dense algae? And for those where you generally tend to have sparse algae, you typically find these in the forereef at deeper depths. And so you can find a lot of things like sea fans. And if there are areas where you have seagrass, you'll typically find a lot of the white sea urchins. In the areas where you have the dense seagrass, it's a mixture of coral, a mixture of algae, and sometimes you can also find seagrass within this area. And generally the types of algae that we find are dominated by the green algae, things like Halimeda and Colopra, the brown algae, the sargassum ones that go to the bottom, not the floating one, Dictyota and Padina. And then within these areas, you would also find, like I said, some hard coral. And these would mostly be boulder corals that can take the brunt of that wave and wind action. When we talk about muddy bottoms, these are ones that you generally tend to find in inland coastal lagoons, estuaries, possibly dredged areas, and at the mouths of rivers. And this is where sediment is basically just dumped on the seafloor. Dredged areas, we generally tend to find these in areas where you either they need to be dredged for shipping channels. If it's a relatively shallow area and you have a marina or port or something like that. And when we talk about sand, we're just talking about bare sand. The sand sometimes, though, you can have some living benthic cover, which would be mostly algae, maybe some sponges and microalgae. And the last one I'll expound on a little bit would be the boulders and rocks. Now, these are generally rock material that is terrestrial in origin that generally either tend to accumulate or is washed down to the shore. You generally tend to find these areas where the shelf is very narrow, and they often have very steep slopes. And within these areas, depending on the elapsed time when these rocks came down, you can actually have some very diverse habitats. In these type of areas are where you generally tend to find things like Wilkes, Cetarium pica. So all of these are just some of the habitats that are used based on the data that we got from TNC and how they're actually broken down in the INVEST model to calculate or to help in terms of the determination for exposure. Thanks, Simone.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, for this very extensive explanation of the different benthic cover. Now, in her presentation, Sandy also mentioned mangroves and the importance the mangroves have and the fact that we are currently not seeing them on our map. Now, what you're seeing here is a raster map from the TNC, but you could add data to this when it comes to terrestrial covers. And when it comes to terrestrial covers, if we go back and look in our data folder that you should have been able to download, we should be able to see, we're back here, we are in miscellaneous, a land cover raster. There it is, miscellaneous land cover Jamaica. If we load that, so if we take this and drag it, and we move it where we need it, so we're towards to the top, we have a land cover here, which is black and white because it didn't got automatically the symbology. But you can give it the symbology by right-clicking it, properties. Then when you cancel the symbology, you just want to load a style. So right-click, symbology, property, symbology. So at the bottom left-hand side, you get style, and you can load a style. It will ask you where this style file is, and it's in Jamaica, miscellaneous, and this is what we were looking for. Should be that one. There it is. Beautiful. Okay. So now our land cover is nice and well mapped. And this one does have mangrove. So this one does have mangrove here, and it also has wetland around it, more general wetland. Repeat, please. Okay. So whenever you need to load a style to a QGIS file, styles are saved in this .qml type of data set. If the style file has the exact same name as the file itself, when you load the file in QGIS, QGIS is smart enough to look for a styling file. If it finds it with the exact same name, it will load it automatically. What happened here? IMIS _en. So these two names, the .qml, which is your style file, and your actual raster don't have the same name. So it doesn't load it automatically. You can do it in two ways. The simple one is you rename this. You rename the file to have the exact same name of your QML. Sorry, it's in use, so I need to remove it first. Let's remove it from QGIS. So we open again our repository. We are here. We have these two files that don't have the same name, and we want them to have the same name so QGIS can load it directly. So we add in as input. And when I put it in, nice and easy, it gets the same color. Okay. But if you want to do it the other way, let's revert it to its original name. To do that, we need to remove it from here, because you can't change the name of a file if that file is open in QGIS. It will, the file is open and that doesn't let him change the name. So let's revert to this previous name, rename. That was his previous name. When you load it, in, it's black and white because it couldn't find this styling file, this QML. You right click, you go for property, style. So let's show it again. Right click, properties, style, load style, and then you look for the style you want. Open. Okay. So this is a land cover raster for our area of investigation. It's provided to you. So if you wish to do so, you can also use terrestrial cover, land cover, to inform your invest model. In particular, we would like to use mangrove because that was mentioned directly. It's an important type of habitat that we want to have a look at. What you're seeing here is mangrove as class 9 in green, and then you have wetland in blue, and then you have built up area in red and other type of land covers. Now, where do you get data like this? Actually, data like this has been prepared by us using a process which is called semi-automatic classification of satellite images. Semi-automatic classification of satellite images is basically taking satellite images free of charge, Sentinel-2 data, they're free, they have a 20 meters resolution, and then you start educating the machine. You start to tell the machine which pixel are what. And by slowly giving the machine, the QGIS, a series of information, he eventually learns enough to be able to code or to be able to categorize the rest of the area. So you don't need to categorize a single piece. He can do it automatically. I'm explaining this for the most QGIS savvy of you here. And I just want to quickly refer you to a very useful set of resources from where you can get additional information on this tool I just described. So the tool we use within QGIS is called Semi-Automatic Classification Plugin, SCP plugin. As any plugin in QGIS is free and open source. It's been developed by these Italian researchers, Luca and Congedo. And from this website, you will find all sorts of tutorials and information of how to use satellite image in your projects for land cover information and for other aspects as well. Again, I think it's quite useful, very well explained in English, so it's a resource that I strongly recommend. It's not absolutely necessary to do this in this way. There are other resources from where you can get already prepared land cover data. One of them is the recently distributed ESA 10-meter file. Okay, I just want to show you what that is. So the ESA, the European Space Agency, has prepared and is delivering free of charge. You can download it anytime you want. Land cover data, 10 meters resolution for these 15 different classes. And again, it's quite a useful resource because you can get to it. You can get to a quite outstanding level of detail when it comes to land cover. It obviously, since it's done at using at a centralized level, there is no ground truthing of this data, meaning that no one actually went and double checked if those categorizations are the same on the ground, which is something that we didn't do ourselves with our data set we prepared because of COVID. We couldn't come on the ground to ground truth the semi-automatic classification that we did. But it's still a useful resource for certain level of analysis. So that's another source of data that I recommend having a look at. The last one that I want to mention is from where we downloaded our data, which is it's a mangrove, it's a global mangrove watch. From the global mangrove watch, you can actually download a shapefile of the mangroves in your area, in the area you're interested in. And we will load that in QGIS in a second. Now, let's go back to our invest model. Why have we talked so far about all these habitats? We talked about these habitats, especially the benthic habitats, because they provide protection to the coastline. How do we tell the model that they actually do that? And how do we ask them how to do it? Could you please provide us, sorry. Yes, I will submit later on a list of all the different websites that I have mentioned from where you can download this data. So I was saying, how do we instruct the model that some of these habitat play a role, some of these habitat play a higher role than others in protecting the coastline, and so on and so forth. So the models ingest that kind of information through a habitat table. So a habitat table is nothing else than a table where you have in each row all the different habitats you're interested in. And those habitats are associated with a rank that it's 1 to 5, depending on the importance they play in decreasing the impact of coastal hazard. So we were discussing earlier on how muddy bottom provides very limited protection. So that would be a 5. And while coral reef provides, or mangroves play a vital role. So they would get a value of 1. Now, how do you rank this information? This is based on expert opinion. These are not absolute values. It's a qualitative understanding turned into a Likert scale, if you want. That's basically what it is, of the importance of these different habitats. There's a lot of literature on how to do that. That's a lot of examples in the literature that uses INVEST. And there is also the data, the table we have provided you with, which we will go and open right now. So it's in the input. If you go on habitats, you will find two different folders. You want to have a look at the first one, scenario 0, which is the current baseline area. And you will find all sorts of data here. Do not worry too much about them. Let's sort them by name. Let's just look for _08 benthic scenario habitat table. That's the habitat table we're talking about. We open it up. And here is what we get. So the table is very simple. You have the different habitats you want to explore in that particular run of your model. So in our model, we're interested in all the benthic habitats plus the mangrove one. So we have them in our rows. We have associated a rank to them, which again, it's 1 when the protection they provide is high, and it's 5 when it's very low, and there are all the other values in between. So we have coral algae with 1, we have mangrove with 1, we have muddy bottom with 5, we have dredge with 5, and so on and so forth. The protection distance, it's basically a value that the model uses to search for that particular habitat. So in each point, it looks for that particular habitat in a search and protection distance. And it's the distance beyond which the habitat is supposed to provide no protection to the coastline. So if we look at our GIS second, if we put ourselves in a point here, it will look for, say, coral algae in a 500-meter radius or a 1,000-meter radius, depending on the protection distance. And then it will look for the other habitats in a different distance and so on and so forth. How do you set that habitat? How do you set that distance is again based on an assessment of the distance you think the habitat provides, your expert thinks the habitat provides protection. So coral reef that are like 50 kilometers away, they probably have a very limited impact on your particular point you want to look at. So you need to consider that that aspect as well when you set up the different habitat distances. Another way to do it is to basically start estimating, so review the literature and see what others have used in terms of distance. That's what we did. But the model also recommend take multiple measures between the average distance from different habitat to the coast. And once you have multiple measure, you can average them and find an acceptable distance that you can serve as input. It's obviously best to base your understanding of that distance, of this distance on the literature, which you can find. Now, finally, what's the path? The path is where the model finds the shapefile of that particular cover. Why are we talking about shapefile now? Why are we talking about vector data while what we have here is a raster? So you can see here that we have a raster. And similarly, this is the Bentic. Similarly, our land use cover, it's a raster as well. We discussed yesterday the difference between raster and vectors, but what a raster is representation of a continuous value. So each of these grid, which are actually squares, have a specific value attached to them. Now, the model doesn't take, the model doesn't take raster as an input. It needs every single cover as a vector file. So what you need to do is polygonize your raster. It is something that we have already done for you in this case, but if you run the model yourself, you would need to polygonize your raster. And there are different plugins in QGIS that allow you to do that. I'll just show you one of them. So if you click on the toolbox, either clicking Ctrl-T or toolbox, what you get here, it's the list of all the different algorithms and tools that you can run in QGIS. And that's quite extensive. That's all sorts of things in here. GIS it's a word. You're really bounded only by your imagination and what you can do with it. There are all sorts of tools there. And there are also all sorts of supported plugins. So you can support algorithms from GRASS, which is a different QGIS software. You can support algorithm for GDAL, which is a different set of tools, and so on and so forth. So what you basically want is the GRASS one, raster, and you want R to vector, which is raster to vector. It's the one that changes a raster in a vector. I know that this seems complicated for those of you that have not used QGIS before. Do not worry too much about this part if you haven't used QGIS before. The data set already contains the vectorized versions of this file. This is mostly for those that are a bit more GIS oriented. They're probably the people that you will turn to ask for help in this situation. So I'm just explaining this for their sake, really. So you use the R to vector, you tell it which raster you want to vectorize, which in our case is the benthic cover scenario 0. That's the one we want to vectorize. And you can clip everything as it is. Would we get a recording of the steps? You will get a recording of the whole training, so you can stop and run with it when you need to. So feature type area is fine. Value of the attribute colon to start the data. You can keep value. You can keep basically everything as it is, and you can just basically run it. I'm not gonna run it because it takes quite some time to run, but that's all you need to do, and then you will end it up with the different shapefile. And the different shapefiles are actually located in here. So you have category 1, which for us is coral algae. You have category 2, which for us is Purin groove. So if you start loading these things, so if you start loading from your folder, the category 1, let's put it at the very top here. So we have loaded it. Let's have a look at it. It's there. Sorry, there must be some issues with that one. Let me see if we can load a different one. Okay. Right, that's the terrestrial one. Sorry, my fault. We want the benthic one. So we don't want the terrestrial, we want the benthic. So we want to load the category 1 benthic. There it is. We want to load the category 2 okay. Apologies, this seems to be okay. There it is. Category 3 doesn't seem to have any problem. Yeah. So if we turn off our benthic cover, we have loaded our category 10. Move that for a second. Okay. We've loaded our category 10. And if you turn on and off your benthic cover, you will notice that it mirrors perfectly. It mirrors perfectly your sand. It even has the same color. Right? So you can then load your other shapefile, such as category 12. And what's your category 12? Your category 12 is sparse seagrass. And again, it follows it quite neatly. Then your category 13, which again sorry. Should make sense. Yes, it's appearing there. So that's fine as well. And so on and so forth. So you can actually load all of them. I've already done so. And it should be, we should have them here. Should have them in our okay, I don't have them yet, but we can slowly load each of them, so we can have a look at them. We want to load our 9. We want to put it here. We want to load our 8. Again, puts it there. There is started to populate in the same form and shape that it was before. Our 7, our 6, our 5, our 4, there it is, our 3, our 2, also, could you please provide a link for the attended registry? The link is still not loading on my network. Okay, I will ask our colleagues from you to share the resend the link. Okay, so what we basically have here, if we group them, let's group them a second and call it habitats. It's basically an exact replica of our raster. If I turn it on and off, you'll see that below I have the raster. And when I turn on all these vectors, I have the single vectors, but they are individuals. So if I want to see this, but say without the R bottom dense algae, I could turn off category 7. And when I turn off category 7, that disappears. Or if I want to see it without the R bottom sparse algae, I turn off category 6 and that disappear, and so on and so forth. We'll see that in a second, why that is important. But basically, these shapefiles are the one that are pointed to in here. So it's for the reef crest, it looks for this shapefile. For the back reef, it looks for this shapefile, and so on and so forth. Let's load as a final one, the mangrove one. So we want terrestrial, category 9. There it is. Let's load terrestrial category 9 as well, and it appeared. So terrestrial category 9, we put it in our things, and there it is. Terrestrial category 9, we can turn it on and off, and we have our mangroves. So we basically have here all the different habitats we are interested in. All the different habitats we're interested in. For each of them, the models knows where to look for it. It knows the rank they have, and it knows the protection distance to search for them. So it does everything it needs. In fact, the invest model itself, when it comes to the habitat, the only things it needs is the habitat table. It doesn't need all the different shapefiles, because the location of the different shapefiles, it's indicated in the table itself. So all you need to load there is the habitat table. Why have I spent so much time working on this? Because we will see later on, but I can anticipate it now. The one of the easiest way you can run, could you please recap the step for transforming the raster layer to vector again? Yes. So very quickly, you will get at some point when you run a model like this, you will get a raster with a different Bentic cover, such as this one. You will get a raster like as this one. You would want to transform it from raster to vector. The tool you want to use is called R2Vect. R2Vect. It's part of the GRASS family. If you're familiar with GRASS, you know that it's a standalone software as well, but you don't need a standalone software. You can run GRASS algorithms within PJS. You open it, anytime you open a QGIS tool, you get a GUI, a graphic user interface. So you don't need to code, you mostly don't need to code. You can just click and point and click on what you need. You tell it which raster you want to modify. It notices that there are a number of rasters in the table of contents, so it helps you by showing them to you. Click the one you want. You keep everything else as is, and you run. You will end up with a different shapefile for each category, which you can then rename, color code, and you will end up with something similar to this. Okay, so again, we spent so much time here because you can, one of the easiest way you can run scenarios is either to start wondering, okay, what would happen if mangrove wasn't there? So what would happen if the actual land cover of Jamaica, terrestrial and benthic habitats, wasn't like this, but was like this? So mangrove was gone. Or what would it happen if this whole coral reef would die out? And you can run different scenarios, either by removing completely a vector, modifying a specific vector. So for example, let's assume that you dig a new canal somewhere here, and that one becomes category 8, muddy bottom. You can do that by modifying this particular vector here. You modify that. I just selected it. It turns green when you select things. You can modify it, reduces, extending it, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say is that you can run different scenarios by modifying the distribution of the benthic and land cover habitats that plays a role in your model. We will see how to do that in the simplest way possible, removing one of these. So basically telling the model to run without one of these. But that's basically how you can, this is one of the solutions you can use to create different potential scenario. Another way you can run scenarios is to tweak on the ranking. So you could, for example, decide not to have one mangrove class, but 2 mangrove class, mangrove in good health and mangrove in poor health. Or you could have 2 coral, algae, or spur and grove categories. Again, one in good health, one in bad health. The good health one could have a rank of 1, but the other one should have a rank of 2 or 3, because it's in poorer health, it will provide less protection. And again, you can go back here, takes your spur and grove or your coral and algae. It's our category 5 and category 4. I'll turn off all the other layers just to have a look at them. And you can map which one are in good health and which one are in bad health. And you separate them. So you start saying that this patch here could be in good health or in bad health, and you assign it to a different shape file, and so on and so forth. So you can get creative on how you run different scenarios. Okay. I will explain the last aspect that we didn't touch on yesterday, and then we can get some question and have a quick break, because I'm afraid I might have run long on this habitat part, but I think it's important. It will be helpful later on for our work, so it's definitely relevant. Let's go back to our Invest GUI. We were requested to input the habitat table. We have done so. Note, the habitat tables needs to stay in the same folder. So there it is, our habitat table. Needs to stay in the same folder as where all the shapefiles are. Otherwise, that path doesn't work. So it doesn't know where to find things. So everything, the shapefiles, the habitat shapefiles, and the habitat tables are in a single folder. Very important. Now, we were requested to input a human population information. What's the human population raster? The human population is a raster that shows the location of population density. We have retrieved one website. Again, another interesting source of data when it comes to population data. This is an example for Haiti. So it's a service offered by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and it's the Human Data Exchange. You can find all sorts of geotiff, so these are rasters, with the population of different countries. This is an example for Haiti, but there are other countries as well. And it's even differentiated according to age, which is another interesting thing. So why does the model needs a population density raster? First of all, let's go and have a look at this population density raster. Let's load it in our QGIS. It obviously rests in our folder, habitat, chuck it there. Here we are. What is this? This is exactly what it looks like. It's a raster, so it's a representation of continuous data, and it tells us how many people lives in each of these square. It's an estimation of it. It's not perfect. It's not that there is such a sharp difference between these two districts. It's probably based on the enumeration district and the parishes, I assume, because this is Kingston Parish, if I'm not mistaken. But anyhow, it's a good approximation of how many people live in different areas. So if you go down and you look, see that it's separated in squares, and each square has a number of people, assumed number of people. What does the model do with this data? It doesn't use it to calculate the exposure index. It doesn't go into the equation of the exposure index. We saw the equation of the exposure index yesterday. It's here. It's a calculation of different ranks, but it doesn't have habitat there. The model uses the habitat one to provide an assessment of the people per square kilometers that live around each point. And I described yesterday why that is important. Yeah, it's important because once we have understood which shorelines are at higher risk, we do have an appreciation of vulnerability. We can identify places which have the highest population density and the highest exposure index. So that was a brief description of the population density. The last things that it requires is the sea level rise. And you notice that we have left that empty. Why have we left it empty? The way the models uses sea level rise information is that what it actually wants is a point shapefile around your areas, where on each point you get an information on rise in millimeters per year. But it is only useful if your area is large enough to have different estimation for different parts of it. So if the north of your areas experiences or is likely to experience more sea level rise than your southern part of your area, it makes sense to include a sea level rise value. If it doesn't, it's an optional one, you just leave it out. It's not that relevant. So with that, we have covered all the input files in some depth. Oh, by the way, it needs a population search radius because it doesn't look everywhere. Around each point, it looks for a certain distance. And 1,000 kilometers, considering that our model resolution is 400 meters, makes sense. It should be twice your model's resolution. Okay. Okay, I load the GUI. I have it installed, but I can't find the cost of vulnerability GUI application. Okay, you load the GUI by simply searching in your search or here. You search for invest coastal. Sorry, you search for invest and coastal vulnerability should appear. You can even search for coastal vulnerability. Now, when you search for coastal vulnerability, one of the first things should appear there. You can open the file location. All invest models are located in within your, at least for me, it's in Windows, Start menu, Programs, and then there is Invest 3.9.0, and you get all the different invest models. We saw yesterday how coastal vulnerability is only one of the invest models. So you can run the others. It should be within, if you have installed it in the same way you have, which should make sense. It should stay in Program, Microsoft, Windows, Start menu, Programs, and Invest. I'll copy paste that and put it.
Sorry about this, everybody. I think Simone's connection's just failed and he's trying to join again. If you just bear with us a few minutes, Simone should be back on. Right, I've just got a message from Simone. Yeah, his Wi-Fi's gone off, but he thinks he's coming back on now. Can I suggest we just have a 5-minute break and sort of go and get a drink, whatever you'd like, and then come back in about 5 minutes' time, and hopefully Simone will be able to resume from there. Sorry about that.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I got disconnected.
Hi, Simone. I've just asked people to sort of just take a 5-minute break while you get back in. So if you want to just give them a couple of minutes to get back.
Yeah. Okay.
So is your connection okay now?
Seems to be. My screen seems my camera seems to have a problem. Okay, so this camera works, but it's definitely not the camera I want to use.
Is your screen share working okay?
Yes, it seems so.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Try to make the okay.
Okay. Are you ready to resume?
Give me just 1 second. I'm trying to find out solution.
You raising towards your.
While I was disconnecting, was there any question?
No, I think looks like ready for you to go ahead whenever you're comfortable.
Okay. Let's see if this works then. Are you able to see me?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay. Still can't see you, but we can see the screen.
Okay.
Now you've come up in the middle of the. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Full service is now resumed.
Okay. Sorry, everyone, about that. There was some issues with my connection, and then we might Zoom, which I don't know exactly why was that. So before I got disconnected, I was asking if there is any question on this, any doubt, is everything clear so far? Is everything? Do you have any question, any comment, problems you have experienced, and so on? Especially those who did manage to run the tool yesterday, because yesterday we reached this point and we actually hit run. You're seeing my screen right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So yesterday we hit run here at this point. We will see now what kind of results we got. But if there is any question, please ask. Okay, if we haven't got question, we could go and have a look of the results. So yesterday we hit run and we indicated a workspace, and we mentioned that the workspace, it is where, sorry, I'm seeing, it took a very long time to open the first time. I tried to run it, give it a few minutes. Yes, the first time you open Invest, it might take some time to run. I'm just wondering, for those who ran it yesterday, who ran it with me, how long did it take to complete the circle? Can someone put in the chat the time it took for them to run it? Because it depends on your machine as well, obviously. My machine is relatively powerful, and it takes 15 minutes per each. Yeah, 15-20 minutes. Okay, that makes sense. That's pretty much the time you need to let it brew, in a sense. Okay, so let's go and have a look at the results. We saved the result in the workspace. After about 10 minutes. Thanks. In underscore out underscore jam underscore scenario 1, etc. etc. So let's go and open that file. For us, that would be, yes, that would be this one. So when you open the workspace, you get an intermediate folder which contains the intermediate files, and then a CSV, a GPKG, which is a geo package. And we mentioned yesterday the difference between a geo package and a shape file. They both hold vector files. The geo package is just much more compressed and neat. So it's a better way to handle vector data, and the model knows that, and it automatically output results in that format. Now you see here, other JPK files, but that is just because I have the file open in QGIS. If I was to close the file, which I can do, let me just close it up, close the file. Managed to retrieve it. Okay. Well, we probably need it later, so let's not do it now. But basically, if you were to close those files, you would only have the GPKG and the CSV. You also get a log file. This is just a description of what the model did. just a description of what the model did. It's not particularly helpful unless you get an error. If you get an error somewhere, you want to copy these, paste it into the forum. If you can't figure out why it's giving you an error, and ask the community to help you out. Chances are someone else has found the same problem and it will tell you what kind of error you're making. When you run the models, you see this information running through, and if it does find an error, it should give you some hint of where the error is, if it's a known mistake. But anyhow, let's focus on, first of all, let's open our presentation. Sorry. And let's have a look at the type of data set that we need. So presentation, interpreting results. Right. So we have run the model with the GUI. We mentioned that it took approximately 15 to 20 minutes. The time it takes to run depends, as I said, on your machine, but it also depends on the size of the area of investigation. If it's a very big area, it will take longer. The geometric complexity on the landmass, as well as the model resolution. So the geometric complexity of the landmass, it's basically how complex the coastline is. So if you have even a small area, but it has a lot of different bits and peninsulas and etc. So it's very complex geometry. The models will take longer to run. Obviously, it's more precise on what is actually on the ground, but it will affect runtime. Obviously, what affects runtime a lot is also the model resolution. If you have 1 point every 400 meters along the coastline, it's different than if you have 1 point every 10 meters. Because for each point, it needs to calculate all the different ranks, and that takes considerable amount of time. So the recommendation is always to start with a relatively, if your areas of investigation is big, run with a smaller one, or break it in chunks, and have different models for different parts of the areas of investigation. Consider, if you want to use the whole area of investigation, simplifying the landmass, and consider having a relatively large model resolution. We run Jamaica with 400 meters model resolution, but that obviously depends on the kind of information you want. The model does avoid recomputation. We mentioned that yesterday. So if you change some input, it will detect all the others and will be faster. I noticed a bug in the model. It does that only if geomorphology is not provided. If geomorphology is provided, you get an error. So my recommendation is always to rerun the model. It's longer, it takes more time, but you get a more precise result, and you're sure you avoid errors. Before digging into the intermediate results, let's go and have a look at the actual JPK. So we pick it and we drag it in here. What have we got? We have got a series of points along all our area of the coastline in our area of investigation. There they are. Make them a bit bigger so you can clearly see them. Let's give them a 6. Too big. Let's give them a 4. Okay. So you have your all different points. They are spaced 400 meters. If you take the measure line, it's a meter. So you have 400 meters there, roughly 400 meter there, and so on. And that's the model resolution. Now, let's go and explore what kind of information we have for each of these. If you right click and you go open attribute table, you will open the attribute table of the feature class, of the feature class, of the vector file. Every vector file is such because either the points in the vector file or the lines in the vector file or the different areas in the vector file are associated with a table that provide results not going over to QGIS. Are you sure you're loading? Sorry, I stopped a second because they're experiencing problem in the chat. Are you sure you're loading the GPKG and not the CSV? So you want to load the geo package. You can just drag it and chuck it there. Yes. I'm not sure what the problem would be there. You can load files in a different way. You can load file in a different way, which is by going on layer, data source manager, either Control L or layer, layer data source manager. When you open the data source manager, make it smaller. You want to load a vector file, and all you need to do is to go and look for it. It should be in your desktop. It should be on or scenario, and it should be that one. If you do open, then you click add. You should have loaded the same file. If that doesn't work, it could be that there is some issue with the geo package itself, but that sounds weird to me, because if it creates it should work nicely. What I can do for now, I could share the geo package with all of you. The geo package I have prepared, so we can realign ourselves and go everyone in the same direction. Did anybody else had problem loading the geo package? If someone else tried?
I got it, but I can't find it. And it's telling me when I try to run it, the model again, it says it already exists. So I'm not sure if I'm just not finding it where it was exported to. Okay,
right. If you get the problem that the model tells you that the file already exists, what you can do is, yes, it gives trouble. What you can do is create a new workspace and insert a new result suffix. So basically, you create a different folder, different directory, you give it a different name, and you rerun the model in a different area. So you don't override long method worked. Okay, so the long method worked for Jillian. That's fine. So let's load it like that, which is the actual proper way to load files rather than paste them in. Again, it's layer, data source manager, vector. You look for it wherever you have saved it, which for me, it's in desktop here, that one, open. You don't need to modify this part. Copy method works for me. Okay, and you add. So 2 ways to do it, but should work. Okay. We can open the attribute table. Sorry, I did that too fast. So we have our files, you have our points. They seem fine, they're nicely spaced. That's the way they should be. Right click, you can open the attribute table. What is the table it's in front of you? You have in each row, each of the different points. Let me try to. So in each row, you have all the different points. You can even zoom to those points, zoom up to selected row. When you zoom up to selected row, you get that particular point. So that particular point, it's point feed 10. And he has a series of informations. You can go and look for point 104, where it is points 104. Points 104 is close to Bull Bay, and so on. So this is just to show you that each of these points is, each of these rows is one of the points we have. We have a series of information here. We have a series of information of which the most important for us is the exposure. We mentioned that the models calculates an exposure index for each of these points that ranges from 1 to 5. That's that value. That's your exposure index for each of those points. So if we want to know where point 246 is, which has an exposure value of 2.65, we can just zoom up to the selected row, and we will find that this particular point, which is in Kingston Bay, has an exposure index of 2.65, etc., etc. You can do the other way around. So you use the information, the identity feature, and you can click on each of these points and you get the same information. So you get the exposure, you get the habitat role, sorry, you get the exposure, and let's focus on the exposure for now. So this one is 2.8, this one is 2.88, this one is 2.887. Makes sense that they're quite similar because they're close one to another, and so on and so forth. Now, what are the other? So before looking at the other information, let's visualize what we're seeing here. We want to color code these points according to that exposure value, so that we can have a good understanding of those data spatially. They must change in the space according to the different variables, according to the presence of ecosystem, wind and wave, surge potential relief, and so on. So you color code them by going on property. Now you have a single symbol for each point, but you want it graduated. You want to color code them based on a numeric value. You can click graduate, and you have your symbol here. It's a bit big, but let's keep it like that for now. What's the value you want to graduate accordingly? That is exposure. So you want the model to give a different color for the low exposure value and a range of colors from the lowest to the highest of the exposure values. And that's a color ramp. So you can give it the color ramp you want. It's up to you to decide what color ramp works. Generally, it makes sense to have a traffic light sort of system, because we have areas which has an exposure index of 1, which is low. So they're good areas. They're kind of green. No problem there. The other areas has an high exposure rank. 4, 5. That's red. That's a red flag. So you can choose your color code. You have a variety of them: blues, green, magma, all sorts of. But what we want in all color ramps is green to red, red to green, red, yellow, green color ramp. So you click that, and we want to invert it because we don't want 1 to be red and 5 to be green. We want the other way around. So if you click on the drop-down menu, you can invert color ramp. Now, when you go and classify in 5 classes, you can classify in different classes, but 5 for us makes sense. You will get a distribution based on quantiles that it's quite interesting for us. So if we hit classify, that's what we get. So points that have an exposure value between 0 and 2.13 will be green and dark green. Then we will have between 2.13 and 2.4, which are lighter green. And then yellow, then orange, and then red. For points which are between 3.17 and 4.9, so that have relatively high exposure index. Where does this breakdown come from? If you click on histogram, load values, there is a quantile distribution. Each of these categories has the same number of points. You can classify them with other ways, such as equal interval, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and so on. Logarithmic scale, natural breaks, which is another type of way to cluster data like this. Equal count works for us. There's a lot of literature about how these type of representation are used in maps. There's even an interesting book which is called How to Lie with Maps, which explains how the way you color code the data set influence a lot the way you perceive it. I'm not gonna dwell too much in it. It's just something that you need to be aware of when you look at a map. It's something quite important to understand the way it has been color coded and the way the data has been organized. My lower values is 1.423. I don't have zeros. Okay. Let's go and have a look at the data set in a second. Let me load this first, and then we will see what happens with yours. Okay. So you color code it and you get your different values. Let's change the size here because it's a bit too big. Let's give it a 3. See if that does the trick. Okay, it's a bit better understanding here. So what do we have? We have a representation of where can I find the data set coastal results, please? It would be the result of you running the model yesterday. If you have not run the model, you don't have that. Let me see if I can paste or send it to you through the chat. Is that something that is feasible to do? No, it's not supported data set. Can I send this? I can't send this either. Okay, give me 1 second while I try to load that data set in WeTransfer, and then I'll send you a link to that. Like, okay. Okay, so I'm loading the file in WeTransfer so we can all align ourselves. It will be ready in a second. I'll check the link, the download link on the chat. So what are we seeing here? We have color-coded our points based on exposure. Some of these areas are more exposed than others. And that could be because of a variety of variables that we have considered. Some of them could be due to the relief. So some of them could be due to the habitats. It could be due to the geomorphology. It could be a combination of the different aspects. You can easily know that by opening the attribute table. So if you open the attribute table, you should see, by the way, I'm trying to load on the chart the WeTransfer for you to download the data set we're working on right now. Before the exposure value, we have a number, actually 6 different R underscore something. We have R underscore habitat, R underscore wind, R underscore wave, surge, relief, and geomorphology. What are these? These are the individual values for the habitat information, for the habitat, for the geomorphology, to the relief, for the wind exposure, for the wave exposure, and for the surge potential. We haven't used sea level, so we don't have that. And those values, each of them ranges from 1 to 5, and the exposure index, it's the geometric mean of those 6 values. So it's basically the rank for geomorphology times the rank for relief, for habitat, for wind exposure, for wave exposure, for sea surges, to the power of 1/6. So the power of 1 over n, where n is the number of input variables you have considered. So what we're seeing here, this value there, exposure, is actually that times that, which is rare wind, times that, times that, times that, times that, to the power of 1/6. And here we can get a good understanding of which factor plays the most important role for each point. And that is quite helpful for us, because we could, if need be, color code our point, not based on exposure, but based on each of these aspects, and see where wave is more important, where wave is more relevant, where wind is more relevant, where habitat is more relevant. Someone mentioned in the chat that they don't have a 0 value. So I'll have a look at my exposure value. You can click on things and it will put them from top to bottom. I don't have a 0 value as well. My minimum value is 1.4272, so that we're probably aligned there. What I have is a number of points that have a null. They have a null because they couldn't find a relief value. Remember that in the GUI, we gave a relief search radius, 500 meters, if I'm not mistaken. That file probably didn't find enough data in 500 meters, and it makes sense because there seems to be the points at the beginning and at the end of our area of investigation. So they were a bit too close to the end of our dam for it to work. So those are probably points that we'll need to exclude from our review. Yeah, okay. There were points that were here toward the end of our area of investigation. So that's what they are. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that you can even have a look at the habitats. So you can identify which points were most protected by habitats. There's quite a few of them that have a value of 1. 1 is the minimum value you can get. So those points were probably very well protected by habitats. Some of them, not that much. You go toward the end and you get values, 1 value of 5, a few values around 4 or close to 4. So those were not particularly well protected by the different habitats there. What you could do, and it's quite helpful, is to load our habitat data set. So remember earlier, we loaded our different habitats, which were of interest for us. We can put them up again and go have a look of what's happening in different areas. So those places are quite well protected because there is some coral reef there, and coral reef provide quite a lot of protection. Actually, it's probably clearer if instead of the vector file, we load the raster file. So those areas were quite well protected because that orange thing you see is coral reef. So they were fronted by a combination of coral reef, hard bottom, sparse seagrass, dense seagrass, as well as some mangrove, which I'll load. Just give me 1 second. There it is. So there are points that were quite well sheltered. It wasn't the same when we look at these areas here. There is mostly sand there. There is a bit of our bottom dense algae to protect those areas, but not that much. Other areas that are quite unprotected are on around here, mostly sand. There is coral reef at a certain distance, but probably, but it was considered too far to provide a major contribution. So that distant aspect plays a role here in kind of excluding that part. In other areas that we can see some red areas are on the Kingston Bay. Now, remember that habitat plays a role, but it's only one of the different variables. So, for example, here we see red, and there's a combination of sand. There's quite a lot of sand here, but there's also other habitats. So it doesn't really explain to me why this value doesn't have a lower exposure index. What I could do is click on it. You need to have it as the active layer in the talk, in the table of content to click on it. I can click on it and go and explore what's happening there. So what's happening there is that as a very low habitat value. So habitats do play a role there, but other factors are quite high. Geomorphology is quite high. It means that that area is not protected by seawalls or other structure, at least according to our data set. Remember, our data set could be wrong in places. The relief, it's probably very low above sea level, so the relief doesn't help much. It's fronting the open sea, so the wind and wave and the surge potential are quite high, and as a result of that, its exposure index it's 3.78. So it's quite high up. You can do that kind of analysis on different areas. For the sake of time, I just want to move on, but I hope you get the gist and you start to see the potential of a tool like this. You can immediately visualize where the areas of highest exposure index are located. And that, from a land use planning point of view, coastal management point of view, it's quite helpful because immediately tells me something about these areas where I probably will need to focus my effort. Another aspect that helps inform the decision-making process is the population habitat. Let's go and have a look here. Click on a point there. So you get a value for population of 6,711. That is people per square kilometers. An estimation of density in the unit is people per square kilometer around that point. Now, it's not that there are 6,000 people around that point. Excuse me again, but could you please don't forget to explain loading the GIS, Jamaica base map? Still can't get it loaded. Thanks. Okay, let's do that again. If you don't have the OSM, if you don't have the OSM and you only get data like this, which don't make much sense to you, I understand. What you need to do is right click. Sorry, new connection. So get yourself the browser. If you don't have the browser, like this, you right click anywhere, browser panel, browser panel is quite big. You get all sorts of things there. So scroll around until you get the X, Y, Z tiles. You right click on the X, Y, Z tiles and you go new connection. It's a connection because these data come from the internet. We didn't download the USM base map. It's too big a file to download. You get it from the internet. So you do new connection, you give it a name, OSM base map. I call it 2 because I already have one. And it needs to know the URL from where to from where to load those files. And it's the one I chucked in the, I put it in the chat earlier on. Let me retrieve it. Okay, it's probably got lost in the thread of the chat, so I'll get it. I'll take it from one that I have or they already have. So put it in the chat. Okay, so XYZ, right click, new connection, URL, any name you want. Now you have it there. You go in your talk, you double click, it appears. As you see, it has covered everything else. Why has it covered everything else? Because things get rendered in order. It's the first things he finds, is the first things he renders on top of everything else. You need to take it and drag it to the bottom. Take it and you drag it to the very bottom. There we are. Okay, so we need to accelerate a bit, I'm afraid. I was saying that you get population information. You get population information when, with having that online on active, you click on some of these points. Now that value there doesn't mean that there are 6,000 people living 1 kilometer from that point. It means that the population density around that point is 6,500 and 6,500 roughly people per square kilometer. Our population density raster was here. This is our population density raster. So if we click on that point, we get a value of 3,741 and so on and so forth. Why is that important for us? It's important because when we look at different points, especially when we compare red points, a red point here, so a point that has an exposure index of 3.22, compared to a point that has an exposure index of 3.6, but has fewer people living around it, it's more important for me as a planner and for any other decision maker. So this 1 point there, or that 1 point here, although it has a lower exposure index, for me is more important because it is more populated. And therefore, there are more people at risk. The exposure is higher, people are there, which are our element at risk. We will see in depth the conceptual modeling of vulnerability tomorrow, but that is a good understanding of why is this important for us. Now, before running some model, I want to show you the last interesting thing about the data set as exported by the model itself. When you open the attribute table, we have explored all the different columns. We have our 6 values for rank. We have our population expressed as in people per square kilometer around each point. We have the exposure index for each point. We have 2 more columns. One is exposure not habitats, and the other one is the habitat role. What are those? That's where the models gets interesting. The models automatically runs or calculates an exposure index as if this value was 5. Having this value as 5 simulates running the model without the habitat. So if you were to run the model without any habitat, you would get that value there. It's obviously an extreme situation, and it's not properly a scenario. There is no scenario where all of our benthic cover and all of our mangroves disappears, all of them. It is done though, because it can help identify the habitat role. Once you have this value minus this value, so habitat exposure with no habitats minus exposure with habitats, give us an habitat role. And that is a value that ranges from, for us, from 0 to 1.10. And it gives us a qualitative understanding of the contribution habitat has. And just as an exercise, we can style our data set, instead of using exposure, using the habitat role. So what we want to do now is to color code our point based on their habitat role, trying to visualize spatially where the habitat plays an higher role. Let's give it a different color ramp. So let's look at our color ramp. I quite like magma. It's a cool one, but again, we want it inversed. So we want lower value to be to be yellow, and darker value, which represent a most important habitat role, to be darker. So what we want to do is invert the color ramp. When you reclassify, there we are. We have 5 classes. Get exposure, no habitat, but no exposure only in the attribute table. You got exposure, no habitat, where in the symbology? Are you sure you are in graduated rather than in categorized? You need to be in graduated, and when you look at there, you need to scroll. You need to scroll a bit, but you should see all of them. You should see this was in the attribute table. Okay. I'm not sure I understand the problem. So when you open the attribute table, you don't see, you only see exposure, no habitat. You don't see exposure and habitat role.
That's correct. I only see exposure, no habitats. The field with exposure only is missing from the result.
Okay. Is that the result of your own running of the model, or it's the one that I just sent?
I'm running it, trying my own attempt.
Okay, you're trying your own results and you don't see the exposure. Is that for all points or just for some? Because I have some points that are null as well.
The whole field is missing. There's no field for exposure.
Okay. I never encountered that problem. Does someone else has that problem as well? Okay. I never encountered that problem, honestly. My recommendation would be to try to rerun the model, and in the meantime, you can download the model that we have circulated. And if you still have some problem, I'll give you my email address and we can try to figure that out. More is that, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so what we were doing is we were property. We were color coding were color coding based on habitat role. We were using a different color code. We can use any color code, but this one works nicely. Classify and then apply. Okay. What have we got? We got darker points and lighter points. The darker points is where the habitat role it's higher. So on this area here and on this area there in the Kingston Bay, we have quite a lot of habitat role. What does that mean? That means that those values, the exposure index of those values is mitigated quite a lot by the presence of habitats. So this habitat here reduces the value of those exposure index quite a lot. It could be because the exposure index would be so high without them that they actually have an important role in reducing that value. That's a lot of importance here as well. So they do act a lot in reducing the impact. This could be a combination of the mangrove and the coral reef. It's quite a lot of legwork done by the coral there, surely. Not that much done here by the sand. That was understandable. And you can again get a nice interpretation of the impact the habitat play. In the Kingston Bay itself, not that much. They don't play that much of a role, the big of a role. Okay, so that's pretty much what you can get when you run the model once. Sorry, there are other, right. So there are other intermediate output that are interesting. So what we have just looked at is the JPKG. So the actual geo package that you extract. We have looked at the exposure. We have looked at the different R variables. We have looked at the exposure, so the variable exposure, no habitat. And we have looked at the habitat role as well. And we have looked at the population. Now, if you open your results folder, you will find also CSV. This is not particularly helpful. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, an Excel version of the table you can open in QGIS, except it doesn't have, it's the exact same table, except it doesn't have that geolocation, which is what makes it interesting. So it's not particularly helpful. Inside the intermediate, we have a lot of different data that the model needs. Not all of them are helpful or useful. The only one that is kind of interesting is the intermediate exposure result. I'm afraid we won't have time to look at it now, because I really like to first run a different scenario and show you how you can run different scenarios. But in the documentation of QGIS of Invest, it will explain in detail what each of these intermediate files are. And I recommend you have a look at the intermediate exposure value. Just in a nutshell, what it is that, as we mentioned the other day, these values are calculated in different ways. So the rank for geomorphology, the rank for relief, for natural habitat, sea levels, wave exposure, and surge potential are calculated using different algorithms and different processes. Some of them are given a value based on our categorization. Others are basically binned into one of the category, either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, based on a percentile. So you get a range of absolute values you quantile it into 5 groups, and then you assign those values. Then you assign the rank. That happens for relief, sea level change, which we are not using, but it happens for relief, wave exposure, wind exposure, and surge potential. The intermediate data set contains that absolute value before it is binned into the 1 to 5. So before the R variable name is created. So it's interesting if you want to dig a bit deeper into the model. But for now, we won't use it. Okay. I know I'm running a bit fast, but I'd really like to cover a last part of this training, which is how you could use this to create different scenarios in the last 45 minutes of this presentation. But before doing that, is there any question? Is there any comments so far? Is everything clear? Is everything working all right? So far, so good. Okay. Right.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
The feature table that you opened on the right-hand side, can you explain how you got that again? So you can look at the characteristics of each point.
Okay. You want to look at the characteristic of each point. The tool you want to use is the identify feature. So it's one of the buttons here. If you don't see it, what you can do is always go to help. Sorry. What you want to do is, if you should have it here. So it's identify feature, but if you don't find it, you can always click Control Alt E or Command Alt E if you are on a Mac. So Control Alt I, identify, or Command Alt I creates this arrow with an eye. You need to have the layer you want to query selected. Once you have it, you can click on any point. It should open automatically on the side your identify result table, where you have
Okay, thank you.
okay. So when I start changing the properties of the coastal exposure result, I can no longer see it on the map. Further, I'm not seeing the rank after I did the color ramping. Right. Not sure if that's what happened to you, but I'll show you what happens when you. So if you need to go to graduated, and you need to be sure that you give it a value. It needs a value to calculate on. So if it doesn't get a value, or if it gets a wrong value, it won't show it. So you need to click exposure. Then all color ramp, red, yellow, green, or any other one you want. You can invert it, and you need to classify. So if you classify, you need to see the different values appearing in this box here. And you can even load the histogram, but that's not necessary. When you apply, that applies.
Let's pass on. I watch the cricket. What are they done? Oh, VBN under 19.
Sorry, did that work? Nope. In the ranks after I did the color ramping. Yes. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. I think we can use the remaining 40 minutes of our training to look at this aspect. So, use of scenario. You're not already done, so please, yes. Use of scenario. We saw how the model automatically produces two different scenarios, the one with habitats and the one without habitats. So it automatically gives us some information about the role of the different habitats. But we also said how that is kind of unrealistic, because what it actually would represent would be a situation where all these habitats here disappear, all of them completely. And if they all disappear completely, these will get turned into we will get basically the one with exposure no habitat. Right, much worse situation where most of it's red. But it's kind of an unrealistic situation. So we could, So we could run more realistic situation by playing with by simulating different habitat removal or habitat changes, as I was mentioning before. So we can manipulate the distribution of habitats to simulate the effect climate change will have on marine ecosystem and the impact human activities will have on these ecosystems. So we can calculate the exposure index without the presence of a particular benthic core to isolate and assess the ecosystem services provided by that habitat there. So what I'm saying is we could run the model. Let's go back to our previous visualization. So let's have exposure. Okay. So we could run the model asking ourselves what would happen if its spur and grove category 5 was to disappear. So what would happen if that spur and grove areas was not there? Or what would happen if our mangroves was gone? We don't need to do it for all mangroves. So in this way, we are removing all of them. We're removing the one in Kingston Bay. We are removing the one at Albion. We're removing all of them. We could do it selectively. We could modify a vector file and remove a part of it. For example, let's run it by removing the Albion one. You could run it without that, keeping the other mangroves, but simulating, for example, some particular development project in Albion that leads to the loss of that particular area. Or you can run it by simulating a partial loss of that area. So you can, for example, split the feature there and you remove a part of it. You simulate a decrease in that particular mangrove and you rerun the model with a different configuration. What I like to do with you now is to run the model, assuming that mangrove has been lost. So all the mangrove we have, let's try to isolate the mangrove we have mapped. We have mangrove, quite a few mangroves in Kingston, and we have mangrove in Albion, and at least the one we have mapped are those. There might be others, but those are the one we have mapped. We could simulate the loss of this particular habitat. How do we do that in InVEST? We act on the habitat table. So if we look at our GUI, we know that the GUI calls an habitat table. And if we open that habitat table, you will see that the habitat tables in the model we want to run considers the reef crest, and he has a shapefile, a vector file for the reef crest, a forecrest, and he has a vector file for the forecrest, and he has mangroves, and he has a vector file for the mangrove. If we remove that, or better yet, if we create another table just to save this one without mangrove and rerun the model will not look for mangrove, and that simulates the loss of mangrove. So I have created, what you could do is two things. You can go in your input, put Jamaica, sorry. Habitat, and you can look for your benthic habitat table. Let's remove this one. I already created this one, but let's do it together. So you basically want to duplicate this file. You copy, you paste it, you rename it. Remember, names are better if they don't have space and if they don't have caps. So no mangrove. You open it. Since it's a copy of the previous one, mangroves is still there. Mangroves is still there because it's a copy of the previous one. But now we don't want mangrove anymore. We want to simulate that we have lost the mangrove. So we can simply delete. We delete, we save it. And what we want to do, and if you want to do it with me, that would be interesting. And that would be a good recap of how you run the model. We're gonna load all the different values, including the new habitat table we have created. If you don't want to redo it, just change the things here. But what I want to do is I want to clear, so everything will disappear. And I want to reload all the different data set because that's a good recap of how you do it. So it needs a workspace. Let's create one. Desktop, let's create a new folder, which we will call output, Jamaica, scenario 2. And we'll remember that it's no mangrove, and today's date. Okay, he has a nice folder where to save everything he needs. Select. Let's give it a suffix, scenario 2. Now, let's open our folder. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place. There we are. So Jamaica, input. It needs an area of investigation. It's a shape file. It's located here. Paste it. It's a model resolution. Let's give it 400. It's a landmass. Here it is. And it's the Waywatch tree. We're gonna give it the local one, although you know from yesterday that if you have more time to run the model, use the global one. It's more precise. And it's a maximum fetch distance, which is 30 kilometers, so 30,000 meters. And it's a bathymetry and a dam, and they are the same file because we have a single file with positive and negative values. And it's an average, elevation average, which was 500. He asked for a continental shelf, which we have. So you always need to load the shapefile there. Let's load the geomorphology and then look at the habitat table. So we load the geomorphology. We give it a geomorphology field value. If you don't remember what that is, basically, if it doesn't find an information on the geomorphology value, it will give the default one, and you can't set what the default is. For us, will be 3 because it's an average value. And it needs the population density. There it is. And a population density radius, which is 1,000, 1 kilometer. In the habitat table, we want to give it our new habitat table. So earlier on, we would have given him our 08 scenario 0 habitat table. But we don't want to give it that, because if we give him that, it will take mangrove as well. But we want to simulate the loss of mangrove. So we want to give it a different habitat table, the one without mangrove. Now we're ready to run it. And we start running, and if you have followed me, it will run for roughly 15 minutes. I have already run it. So in the interest of time, I would like to show you what kind of results you can get and how you can compare 2 different results. So once it's done running, what you will get, it's these. You open it and you get your usual situation. You have an intermediate folder with all your intermediate file. You have your geo package, and you have the CSV as well, and a series of other files that GeoPackage needs. So if you take it and place it in QGIS, put it toward the top, you now have 2. You have coastal exposure result 1 and coastal exposure scenario 0, no mangrove. Let's change the name of that and call it results 2. It will make things easier for us. So you have a different result. You can style it as you did before, or better yet, to ensure comparison, let's style it in the same way as the result 1. So we can really see when we turn one on and off, where changes had happened. To do that, if you right click on a layer with as a certain styling, you can copy that style. So you go on the one you have already styled, right click, style, copy style, all style categories. Right click, style, copy style, all style category. You click on the one where you want to paste the style, and then it's right click, style, paste all style category. Now they have the same distribution and the same colors. What I am expecting is that if I turn one on and off, wherever I have mangroves, I should see some change. So what I'm seeing right now is the top one. It's the one without mangrove. And I'm expecting that when I turn this one off and that one on, I will see changes. So if I turn the top one off, which is the no mangrove, I expect these points to change, and I expect them to change positively, because in the scenario with mangroves, those points should be protected by that mangrove. If the mangrove is not there anymore, those values should become should be higher. So in the no mangrove situation, in the no mangrove situation, let's actually rename it with that information in as well. Let's make it clear. Rename, so it's results to no mangrove. That's it. This is the no mangrove one. In the no mangrove one, again, identity feature, Control-Shift-E. This point is 2.44. What is it if I turn off the no mangrove one and I turn on the other one? It's now 2.3. Lower. So that worked. Something happened there. So when I turn on mangrove, those values change and actually move from being light green to be yellow. So that mangrove did play the role, and now I can see what kind of role it was playing. I can even calculate it because I can subtract those two values and get some information there. I should see something similar here. So with the mangrove, without the mangrove, with the mangrove, without the mangrove. Makes sense if when I do without the mangrove, you see it like this. So without the mangrove and with the mangrove. And then it's a useful tool to calculate different aspects. Now, in this area, that didn't work that much. And that might be because other values were so strong that it didn't lead to a massive change. So without the mangrove, this value is 3.9. And with the mangrove, that value is 3.5. Actually, the mangrove was playing a role. It's just not showing in the color coding. But if I was to do a subtraction between these two values, I can see how that value has changed. And again, this is useful for us. We were seeing yesterday what kind of application something like this could have. But one of them is that you get a good understanding, a qualitative understanding at least, of the role different habitats play. And I think that it's from a point of view of protection, that is quite helpful. Okay, so any question on that? Any comment? Again, you can see here how without the mangrove, those values are 2.13, 2.03, etc. But with the mangrove, without the mangrove, they are 2.39, so 2.4, 2.4, 2.4, and with the mangrove, they're 2.13, so lower, and lower is better. Lower is it's less exposed. So any comment on any question on these? This is just one of the way, probably one of the simplest way you can you can use to run the model.
How would we do it for partial degradation or partial removal of the mangrove?
For what, sorry?
What would be the steps involved to determine the change in exposure for partial removal of the mangrove rather than a full removal,
Okay.
total removal of
Total
mangrove?
removal. You can do different things. You can either differentiate between mangroves. So you create basically two different layers. One is a layer of, say, healthy mangrove, and the other one is a layer of not healthy mangrove. You need to map it yourself. So you need to start mapping which parts of the different mangrove you have are in healthy state or in poor state. And what you do, once you have two shape files, one is healthy mangrove, the other one is poor mangrove, you need to modify your habitat table. Let's go and have a look at our habitat table. Let's try to do it. Yeah, let's have a look at our habitat table. So okay, this is our habitat table. We have a single mangrove class. You basically need to have two, but you can't simply do something like mangrove healthy with a value of 1 and mangrove deteriorated or poor health, or yeah. So you can't simply, deteriorated with a value of, you need to give it a value that it's higher, a rank which is higher, because deteriorating mangrove don't provide the same protection as healthy mangrove do. And it's based on your professional judgment to decide what value that should be. It could be a value of 2 for deteriorating mangrove. It could be a value of 3 for very deteriorated mangrove, and so on. You need to add the protection distance, which it's likely to be the same that it was for mangrove. But again, you need to decide how far the model needs to search for mangrove. And that is based on your understanding or the literature and the consensus on how protection for mangrove works. So after which distance it's the protection is not valid anymore. And you do that. But this is not sufficient. Why? It's not sufficient because you need to have created a shapefile of deteriorating mangrove and very deteriorating mangrove. And you need to let him point to those. So what you need to do is that you need to start working in QGIS, creating a new shapefile, and you start mapping where the deteriorating mangrove are, where the very deteriorating mangrove are, and so on. Once you have that shapefile, you put the path to it in it, and you rerun the model with that further information. I'm not sure if it's clear.
Yes, it is. Thank you. But a quick question: are you able to copy what is already existing and cut it and then save that as a new shapefile?
Yeah. Yes, you can do all sorts of things. Not sure I could show you. Yeah, sure. Why not? I'll try to do it quickly. These things are relatively simple GIS things, but I understand that if you have never used it, if you're not familiar with it, they are a bit complicated. But yeah, you can do all sorts of things. So you can take this mangrove area here, for example, and what you want to do is you want to toggle editing. So now the feature is editable. You can edit it. You can cut parts of it. Split feature. You can say that like, okay, let's cut it like this. And this other side, let's cut it like that, right? So now you have 3 different pieces. They're still all within the same shapefile. So you need to create a new shapefile. And you do that by layer, create layer, create new shapefile layer. Create a new shapefile layer. Where do you want to save it and what's the name of it? Okay. Remember, it needs to stay in the same folder where the table is. So let's put it right there. Let's put it right there, and let's give it a name. Let's call it terrestrial value 9, which is our mangrove. Let's call it deteriorated. Okay, so you have our information. I think that's sufficient for now. The coordinate reference system, it's the one of the projects. For Jamaica is WGS84, UTM zone 18N. It's important that they are all the same. And geometry type, what kind of geometry is? It's a polygon because it's an area. Okay, we have everything ready. Can hit OK. We have it here. It's empty at the moment. So what we want to do is take, if not both, at least one of the parts we have created. Let's take both. Why not? And we cut it from here. So cut it, Control X. We go on this other one. We make it editable, toggle editing, and we Control V. We passed it. So now, there they are. We have created a shapefile. We have called it deteriorated. So now we have a new shapefile. We can save both and stop editing. So save and stop. And save and stop editing. So now we have a deteriorated shapefile. We go in our table, and let's ignore the very deteriorated for now. We have only created a single shapefile, deteriorated. So we have our deteriorated shapefile. We have a new habitat class, basically. We give it a different rank. Let's give it a rank of 3. It doesn't provide the same protection as healthy mangrove, and considerably, let's say 3. What's the name of that shapefile? We need to put the exact name. If it doesn't find the exact name, that leads to an error. So the exact name, let's go and have a look at it. It's that. So it's _07 _in _territorial _gem _value _9 _deteriorated. So you write it. So it knows that it needs to look for that particular value dot shapefile, and there is here _. deteriorated. Be careful with the typing. One of the reasons why I suggested using always lowercase is that if you write that, it won't work, because the name is slightly different for it. Computer are not very smart. Computer really do what you tell them to do, and they're very strict at that. So if it's looking for the deteriorated with a lower TD, it needs a lower D. You can save this as a different CSV. Let's call it habitat table gem scenario 3. Save. Okay, and now you can rerun your model. You can rerun your model in a different, okay, in a different output. So we create a new folder. Actually, let's call it like this. Sorry, new folder. Call it out gem scenario 3 and today's date, just to be sure. Okay, you select the folder, is scenario 3. Everything is exactly the same with the exception of the habitat table. The habitat table is now a different habitat table, because in habitat we should find, there it is, scenario 3. Okay, and now you run, and again you wait for it to finish, and once it's finished, you should, and you load it, you should get, at least for these 2 points, I expect to see some change. This is how you would modify the habitat you have to represent different scenarios. Any other question? Any other comment on how you can run different scenarios? No, okay.
Every condition, you have to have a different shapefile. So if you had 3 different mangrove health conditions, you would have to have 3 different shapefiles.
Correct. Yeah, you need a shapefile for each typology you want. So if you want different type of mangrove, you need different shapefile. Okay, I'll briefly leave you with a sort of an exercise and some food for thought. The first exercise is this. You may have noticed that there is at least one other folder in the habitat 1. So if you open the habitat 1, you'll find the scenario 0, and that's the one we have used so far. But there is another one. There is a scenario 1, and in the miscellaneous, there is even a scenario 2. Now, what are these? These are different distribution of habitats. Afternoons tomorrow, could we schedule another training session to get up to speed with the software? I'm not sure. We will discuss that with you, but I'm not sure we we will be able to do that. But I'll have a chat with you about that. Sorry, I lost my train of thoughts. What I was saying is, what are these? What are these additional things? What we have created for you are potential development, future development of habitat in terms of habitat change and habitat reduction. As we said, you can run the model with a complete different distribution of terrestrial and marine habitats. What we have done is that we have simulated considerable loss of benthic cover at considerable loss of benthic cover, mostly coral and algae, spur and growth, spar and then seagrass. So an increase of abiotic benthic cover at the expense of the benthic one. We have used a different invest tool to do that, which we won't cover in this training. It's called the invest scenario generator model. It's used to create the future development of land and benthic cover. But what basically is, and if you go on QGIS, and you load the different raster that we have created, so you have the current benthic, scenario 0, as is, current 0. If from miscellaneous you load the raster, scenario 1, gem teeth, and scenario 2, teeth, you will notice that something has happened. So this is the scenario where abiotic benthic cover has increased by 50%. This is where it has increased by 25%, and this is the current one. Remember that blue is boulders and rock, and orange is coral. This simulates how coral has died out, and has been slowly turned into boulders. And similarly, you can see how certain tracts of sparse seagrass and dense seagrass has died and has slowly turned into sand. Now, I'm not saying that this is a likely scenario per se. I mean, it's potential, it's possible, it could happen. What I'm trying to say is that you could run the model once, as we did with the current benthic cover. And then you could run it with this configuration, and then you could run it with even a further one, with a different one, and see how that changes over time. We have provided you with all the data to do that. So in the scenario 2, you will find all the different shapefile that relates to this scenario, as well as the benthic cover. Sorry, the habitat table. So you will have all the different aspects as well as the habitat table there. We have provided you with the habitat for scenario 1, which is this one. Again, you have all the shapefile and the habitat table. So you could use them as training set to run the model and compare results on your own, if you wish to do so, to better understand how the model works and what are the potential of the model. So all those data sets are in there. All the different data sets are in there, and it's quite useful. Just a reminder, host, can you please provide us with a list of the ready prepared land cover dataset website? Yes. Could you please provide us with a list of video resources? We'll definitely do so. So just to conclude and to give you some food for thoughts, as I promised, we have the habitat change, and there are all sorts of other potential scenarios that you could run. We mentioned the one you could run with, let's remove this for now. We mentioned the one you could run with the different habitat change. You could modify the geomorphology data set. You could see what happens when you load an hard infrastructure. You could run the model with different population input raster, for example, to see elderly population raster. You could run the model with sea level rise if you get sea level rise information, and you can get creative with this kind of tool. So with that, I want to thank you all. Just to answer some of the questions that are popping up. Yes, I will remember to provide you with a list of the resources. I will, the recording will be available for you. And I can leave you my direct email address in the chat. So if you find some problem with running these, please let me know, and I'll try to follow up on you on different aspect. And yes, so actually I can also put it in here. So yes, so that's my email address, Simone Landucci. So it's on the screen there. And I just want to, I'd like to ask you if you have any question, any comment on what we've seen today. I know it's been a lot of things, a lot of stuff. It's been very packed hours. So you must be very tired by now. But I hope it was helpful, and I hope I have given you at least a general understanding of how the potential of the invest model and what it can do. So anyone has any further question, especially on the last things that I just mentioned on the whole process, on the whole tool? Okay, I get you all must be quite tired by now. Okay, in that case, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank the other member of my team, Sandy, Teddy, Steve Kemp is with us today as well, and as well as others, I think. And I'd like to thank Yui for their support and for organizing this training event. I remind you that there is to complete the attendance register. I think the form should work now, so please do complete that. Yes, it's back in the chat. And tomorrow we will meet using the same link. So I won't say in the same place because it's a virtual place, but using the same link at the same hour, and we will look at we will discuss some application of this. So it's less of a practical GIS oriented type of exercise and more or something like this. So the suggestion box here, it's very much open for your suggestion on how you think something like this could be helpful for you to run in the future. So the link still isn't working. I'm afraid there is some problem with link. I'll ask Erica to review that, and ask the UE colleagues to review that. Okay, in that case, thank you very much, everyone, and I wish you all a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Simone.
Okay.